All right, what we're going to talk about today is spey casting, or double-handed casting. I started about 18 years ago. I got introduced to it over in Milwaukee from a friend of mine. And when I seen him do it, because I've fly fished since 1971 or 2, and I've always been involved in casting. I teach casting. I've worked different programs with casting, and I think what this double-handed stuff is. I think what happens with double-handed stuff is it seems really confusing and too involved, and you'd rather just stick with the single-handed rod. And ironically enough, they now make lines that you can just take your single-handed rod and do the same. These what they call spey cast. So in double-handed casting, there's a couple options you have here, and I mean, there's actually many options you have, but just to make it simple, so a little bit of better understanding of how it all works. There's two different lines we use in double-handed casting. One is Skagit, and one is Scandi. If you notice, the taper on this Skagit is much shorter than the one on the left here. And the reason for that is this line here is made for mostly surface work or slightly weighted flies, but mostly surface work. As where this line here, you can add floating, intermediate, slow sink, medium sink, or extra fast sink. So you have a lot of options with the Skagit. However, the Skagit is for fishing situations where you're throwing bigger flies and heavier flies, as where the Scandi won't handle that. So behind that Scandi, behind that head, we add a running line to it. Running line can be anything from a coated to a standard fly line coating or monofilament. And what I have here, just for an example, is floating running line as opposed to monofilament, 30-pound test. I like 30-pound test for anything up to 500 grains. After that, I go to 40. But this. The only problem with monofilament is when it's cold out, it's going to be very stiff and gets pretty kinky. It's hard to get the kinks out of it. As where this stuff here, you can stretch it out and it's fine. So just keep in mind, if you're in cold situation, monofilaments are probably not the best choice. I would probably go with the regular fly line type. So this is a very thin line. The core is 30-pound test. Just for an example here, this Skagit line, the Skagit line that I showed you before, this one here, you can see how blunt it is at the end. That's because you add a tip to that. Be it floating, intermediate, slow sink, fast sink, whatever you want to put on the front of it. That's the options you have. So you have 4 different options with a Skagit line, as where with a Scandi, you only have one option, that's a leader. All right? With like as I mentioned, the lines now are printed. The grain weight is printed right on the line. So if you have more than one line, it's not hard to. You don't have to have a scale to weigh them and find out all that information. So, but I think the biggest problem with people when they first start this is it seems all so confusing. It's really not any different than a standard weight forward line. The only option is that we have with the short heads is we can change them on the same use the same reel and change different heads. I don't use a lot of Skagit. I'm more of a Scandi caster because I do mostly surface stuff, and most of our rivers where I fish, we don't need to get real deep. I put on a slow intermediate tip on my Scandi lines, and I can get that fly down maybe 2-3 feet. And for most of the rivers I fish, that's deep enough. You get out west someplace when the big deep rivers, yeah, you're going to have to get down. And particularly when the water gets cold, you got to get deeper. So that's when I will go to Skagit. When the water gets colder, if we're fishing steelhead, and the water gets colder, I'll go to Skagit so I can get the fly down deep and in that cold water system. So like I said, you have 2 options with running line. Now, this is a 55-foot head on this reel, and it's integrated. I want to show you this here so you understand what I mean when I say integrated. Okay, so there's the end of the head. The blue is the end of the head, and there's the integrated part. That yellow is the running line. So you don't have the option of changing heads on this particular reel with that head. 55-foot head. double-handed rod, cast, very nice. This is a 530 grain line, probably go on a 14-foot 8 weight. You don't match the line, but incidentally, you don't match the line to the rod number. In other words, if the rod says it's an 8 weight, double-handed or single-handed, you cannot just put on a 8 weight line on that rod. Because if you just put on a 8 weight line on that rod, it won't work. You don't have enough weight in that line to make the rod flex enough to make the cast. As an example, I have a 6 weight with me with a 360 grain line on it. That's equivalent to about close to a 12 weight fly line. And it's a 6 weight rod, but it's 11 feet long. So the longer the rod will take a heavier line. That's worth knowing, because what happens is people buy these double-handed rods and they'll say, well, it's a 6 weight, and they'll go out and buy a 6 weight line, double or weight forward, and they go, boy, that don't work at all, and they give it up. No, you have to find out what the grain window is on that exact rod, and usually the manufacturers have that information, or you can go online and find that information also. So it's not really that complicated. Here's an interesting thing to know. If you have a reel like this here and the leader's not sticking out of it, and you're trying to find that tip, the tippet, if you put your finger right here on the reel and back it up, there comes the leader right there. Let me do that again. You know, sometimes you're fiddling around trying to get that leader out of the, just put your finger on the line, back the reel up one time, there's the leader, just pull it out. It's just a good tip. All right, so this is a 360 grain Scanty. It's 34 feet long in its head length. The back of it, I have a textured running line on it. Some people say, well, the textured running lines are a little hard on the hands. I don't agree with that. It's not a problem. But it shoots really well. What slows a line down in casting is the friction of the running line going through the guides. The more we can reduce that friction, the better it'll cast. That's why mono casts much better, or at least farther. However, there are situations when it gets real cold out, I don't like mono. This particular line here, I can change heads on this same reel. No extra spool, no extra reel. That's it, very simple. So you carry an extra head in your pouch or whatever you're carrying for a vest. Or, I guess most people today don't wear a vest, but I still do because I'm an old guy. But at any rate, just have extra heads in your bag, and you can change the head right on the scene, right on the water. So this one here, so there's loop to loop is the deal. Let me put this down here. So this is just a loop-to-loop connection. That's all it is. I loop that onto that. Pull it tight. There's the loop. That's it. Now if I want to change heads, all I got to do is disconnect this head and go to the next head. Roll this one up, put it in my pouch, take the other one out, put it back on this running line. So I have that option. So on a Scanty floating line, as I mentioned, it's pretty much a surface line, although you can throw a little bit of weighted flies on them. I run a leader of about 15 to 16 feet long. With a Skagit line, with a sinking tip, about a 5-foot leader, maximum of 5 feet. I'll usually use, if I'm in real fast water, I'll go 3, maybe 4 feet. But I run straight 20. I don't screw around with light tippets. You've got a sinking tip on there, and you want that fly to be drugged down by that sinking tip as fast as possible. The 16 to 17 foot leader on these double-handed rods just lay out a fly, just beautiful. They really do. And so I guess that's one of the reasons I like Scanty, but there's situations where Scanty is not the right tool. That's where Skagit comes in, and as we mentioned before, that's when the water starts to get cold and you're using bigger flies, and you want to get deeper, you're going to have to go to Skagit with some sinking lines. Skagit lines are a little aggressive, but they get their job done. They get the big flies, and you get deep, but they're not a delicate line. The advantages of a longer head are that there's not as much stripping involved, as where the shorter the head, the more stripping's involved. So if it's real cold out and you're stripping, you might get a lot of ice in the guides and stuff like that there. I mean, if you're steelhead fishing when it's cold out, but the point I'm making is with a longer head, like this one here is an integrated 55-foot head. It's 55 feet long. So you just make the cast, swing it down, step down a couple steps, make your cast again. Or you can shoot some line, make a longer cast too. But the point I'm making is that the longer the head, the less stripping you got. So those are a different advantage than the short head. But the head length I prefer is like a 35-foot head for the kind of fishing I do. But if you're fishing in tight quarters, like for trout and stuff like that, where you got a lot of brush behind you, go with a Scandi Light. It's only 17 feet long. Your rod's going to be anywhere from 8 to 9, 10 feet long, maybe 11 foot long. And by the time you set up the roll cast, you don't have much line behind you. You're only going to have 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet of line behind you. So you can fish with a lot of brush behind you. You don't have that problem of getting caught, your fly caught in the bushes. So a lot of advantages to this type of casting and these type of lines. That's what I'm getting at. I wish I'd have had it years ago. I wish I'd have known about it. They've been using shooting heads on the West Coast since the 30s, but at any rate, so, I mean, this type of casting is just roll casting. That's all it is. It'd be that Skagit or Scandi, it is just roll casting with a change of direction option. And if you can roll cast, which if you fly fish at all, you have to know how to roll cast, you'd be amazed how well it works. And there's a few casts that you use to do this and do that, but they're all very simple. They really are. I mean, they're like, I call them ABC casts because they're easy to learn once you understand what it is we're doing. It sounds really complicated, and it's only, I've heard comments like, oh, that's just for certain kinds of fishing and stuff. You can take a standard 3-weight, 7-foot fly rod and get a fly line that's designed to do this kind of casting, i.e. a Scandi Light, and roll cast and cast just beautifully with it. Without all that false casting, it's just a roll cast, boom, it's out there. How would you like to be able to roll cast 40, 50 feet with one move? Just boop, boop, it's done. Standard roll casting with a regular fly line, you can't do that. You're limited because it doesn't don't have the inertia to cast. But when you overweight the line, it loads the rod deeper, therefore it throws further. I throw 60, 70 feet with a single-handed 4-weight. Roll casting. Seriously. So, you know, you hear all this stuff, oh yeah, that's just, you know, if you're fishing big rivers and stuff. No, it applies to light rods. I built and this is not an exaggerated, I'm not saying something that's exaggerated, okay? What I'm saying is I built a 5.5-foot spinning rod into a little fly rod, and I can roll cast that thing 50 feet with the right line on it. It's not because I can do it, it's because I'm using the right equipment on that rod. You can do the same thing. You know, it's really not that complicated once you understand it. It's no more difficult than learning using a single-handed rod, I mean, for a standard fly line. I mean, that was complicated in the beginning also, but with these Scandi Lights and Skagit lines and stuff like that it's no more complicated to learn than it was for you to learn a standard fly line. In fact, it's probably easier. There's less components to that than there is to a single-handed rod. But in the beginning, it may appear to be easy for somebody that's doing it, but when you're first starting it, it's a whole new venture. But at any rate, and behind, so I have you got to have backing on, then you put your running line, then you put the head on. All right, the next time I get here on the rock, we're going to do some casting. So I'd like to have you come along and try to show you some of the basics of this so-called Spey casting. I say so-called because it's a long ways from traditional Spey, but we'll just call it Spey because that's what it's known as. But at any rate, next time we're going to do some casting with both Scandi and Skagit. So we'll show you the benefits of both. All right?